What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my solo role-playing and wargaming channel. I'm the Lonely Dungeoneer, and this is the first session of the Solo Chainmail Enduring Hexcrawl. This series is going to be a sort of experiment. I've received feedback recently requesting longer duration and more frequent content, and I'm going to try to give that to you in this series by experimenting with my solo role-playing process, experimenting with my recording process. Essentially, I'm streamlining how I play a little bit. I'm moving some of my note-taking into the analog realm rather than the digital realm. I'm going to try to record longer clips with less editing, like right now, and I'm going to try to not kind of stop and re-record short clips over and over to make it sound exactly right. I'm going to leave this a little more unedited. You're going to hear more filler words like as you're listening, but hopefully that will all pay off with longer form, more frequent content. We're going to try this out, and I'm anxious to hear what you think about the new style, the new format. Please feel free to leave your feedback, to comment, and let me know what you like and what you don't like, what is working for you and what is not. So let's talk about this series now, and what exactly I mean by Enduring Hexcrawl. So to me, a hexcrawling campaign is a campaign where you plop your party in one hex on a giant blank map of hexes, and one hex at a time, your party goes out and explores each hex, encounters strange and new things. Maybe a large overarching plot develops from that, and actually I personally tend to look for overarching themes that can connect the individual stories that come up in particular hexes and regions. But that doesn't have to happen. It's really an open-ended style of gameplay where you kind of explore and randomly generate the world as you go. And that's really exciting for me personally, because you don't really know what you're going to get. You don't have a game master that has kind of pre-built this world for you. You're kind of discovering it on your own as you go. And to do this solo, we're going to be doing this absolutely solo. And the main tool we're going to use to make that happen is the Mythic Game Master Emulator. This is the second edition. Both editions are excellent, but if you're new to solo role-playing, or even if you're experienced, this is the solo role-playing system. This is my number one go-to tool for playing any role-playing game absolutely solo. And as far as the campaign format goes, the Mythic Game Master Emulator is going to essentially, it's going to help us to flesh out each hex along the way. Any question that we have about what is placed in a given hex, we might use other tools to help randomly generate context, but Mythic is going to help us fill in all of the details. It's really going to enable a solo hex crawling campaign. This is as opposed, of course, to prepared adventures where you have a predefined either region or maybe even a series of linear steps to play through. And I should mention that the term hexcrawl doesn't necessarily imply that you're randomly generating the hexes as you go. You can actually have a game master lay out the hexes for you in advance, and the party members are still going out and exploring the world one hex at a time, much like in the other Chainmail series that I currently have going on this channel. We're playing through the Misty Isles published setting, and that is a hex crawling campaign. The world is made up of hexes, and your player moves across them, and they run into specific encounters when they reach a given hex. So that is definitely a fun and valid way to play. However, in this campaign, we're not going to prepare our map, or hex crawling map, in advance. We're going to generate that as we go, and that's going to be fun because I'm going to discover things about the world exactly at the same time that you do. We're going to be discovering it together, and I find that when I'm watching role-playing series, actual plays, let's plays on YouTube, it can be intimidating sometimes if there's this huge amount of lore and backstory for a setting. Sometimes, the author spends a lot of time, getting you prepped into that world's backstory, And sometimes that's interesting, sometimes it's not, and you'd rather get straight into the action. It almost feels like a precursor that has to happen. And other times they don't explain at all. You go straight into the action, and that's excellent, but maybe you feel like you're missing context by not understanding the backstory of the given world. In this case, there's not going to be a backstory really for you to need to catch up on. We're gonna dive straight into the deep end. We can get right into the action. And this is going to be typical. I plan to run more Enduring Hexcrawl campaigns. We'll see how this goes. Right now, I have an idea that it would be fun to run the same kind of campaign with different RPG systems to see how they turn out. I think that could be fun. But let's shift now away from the term hexcrawl, right? I think hopefully by now you're getting a sense of what that will mean for this campaign. And let's talk about enduring. What do I mean by an enduring hexcrawl? Well, I'm taking this idea of the Enduring Protagonist from Scarlet Heroes and Blackstream Solo Heroes. So Scarlet Heroes is an excellent book that will allow you to play old school role-playing games solo. Really, more specifically, this is going to allow you to play with one or two characters, but at a power level such that you're as strong as an entire party. It basically modifies how damage works, both as dealt and received, for your player and for all of the creatures that you encounter. So if you're playing through a published adventure in an old school RPG system, maybe you encounter, 5 goblins, and maybe that is tailored for a party of 3 to 5. Well, if you want to play solo and you want to play through the published adventure, either you have to modify the adventure such that there are fewer goblins, right? So that you don't get killed, or if you're playing alone, maybe you can't really do the hack and slash style. Maybe you got to go and sneak around. Scarlet Heroes actually will basically empower your 1 or 2 characters to play as if they're a full party, which is really cool and useful. But we're not going to be using this idea in this particular campaign. Rather, I'm going to take an idea from Blackstream Solo Heroes. This is a free, kind of rules light version of Scarlet Heroes. I think this might be older. I'm not entirely certain. But there's one core idea here that I want to use, and that is the Enduring Protagonist. So essentially, in this game, which is a very, very deadly game, especially for a solo player, there are ample opportunities to die. There's going to be death literally around every corner, and a very common way to play these kind of games is to make a giant party of level 1s that are basically cannon fodder, lead them into a dungeon where either they all die, or maybe, just maybe if you're lucky, one of them lives long enough to escape with some gold, earn some XP, maybe reach level 2, and at that point, once you've hit level 2, their survivability will increase dramatically. And at that point, you can be fairly confident that this character will survive for a little longer. So basically, you create and destroy characters over and over again until you find the one that can survive the dangers of the dungeon below, and those adventurers go on to become heroes, right? And that is, it's really cool, and it's a fun way to play. I highly recommend trying it, especially if you're going to play the RPG that we're playing today. But the problem is that it takes a ton of time, like a lot of time. And if you're playing solo, it can be problematic to play one character going into a dungeon over and over again and dying, right? And then creating a new one, sending them in. That can be really challenging. So the idea of the Enduring Protagonist is to embrace a deadly game without accepting death as a consequence. And what this means for our character is that and this is only for one, we have one Enduring Protagonist. We're going to make a character. This character is going to be like the star of our show, the main character. They may actually go out and find other adventurers to delve with them, to explore with them. All of the other adventurers are going to be mere mortals. Our main character, the Enduring Protagonist, is never going to die. And that might sound strange at first because consequences are incredibly important in a role-playing game. And I'm not suggesting that you should go out and remove death as a consequence from all of your role-playing games. However, there are fates worse than death. And if you want to play as a given character long-term in a deadly game, then the idea of the Enduring Protagonist is interesting because essentially what you'll do is any time that the Enduring Protagonist would die, instead they defy death. And when you play Scarlet Heroes or Blackstream, that actually means a specific thing. There's a mechanic that goes along with defying death. Because we're not really going to be playing Scarlet Heroes or Solo Heroes, we're not going to leverage the entire mechanic of defying death that they provide. It wouldn't make sense in our case. But what we will rather do is, when we defy death, we will brainstorm. We'll try to come up with some situation, some miracle, if you will, that happens that will allow the player character to survive, but at a significant cost. This will not come for free, and you basically have to have some large, painful narrative consequence anytime the player character KOs, anytime you would be KO'd. And it actually, in doing this on my own, I found that it's quite funny to keep track of how many times you've actually died over the course of a campaign. And there's also this tumbling effect that can happen. So if you get in over your head as an Enduring Protagonist, in a dungeon or just in some, let's say that there's a larger overarching plot that you're involved with. If you KO several times in a row, that narrative can spiral out of control, and your whole game world can be affected in a very negative way by your repeated death. And even though you're surviving it, and you have the chance to keep playing, keep leveling up, keep becoming more powerful, you still have to roleplay through solving whatever your problems are or achieving whatever your mission is. And sometimes just raw strength is not enough to get the job done. So I found that what you give away in putting down the risk of death and losing your character, if you pick up the risk of severe narrative punishment, severe narrative setback, you can find some very interesting holes. You can dig yourself a very interesting hole to have to climb out of. So to kind of summarize these ideas, in an Enduring Hexcrawl, you first have an Enduring Protagonist, and this is a main character that when they would die, instead, they somehow survive but suffer a major setback, and these setbacks can tumble if they repeatedly KO. And then the Hexcrawl portion is essentially having a world of hexes for this character to explore as they set off on their own independent missions, goals, threads, whatever you would like to call them. And I've found this to be a really fun format that fits well. It fits really well with solo roleplay and the Mythic Game Master Emulator specifically. So with these kind of as our control variables, right? If we're always using Mythic as our solo role-playing system, and we're always, not always, but if we regularly employ this kind of Enduring Hexcrawl mechanic or idea, then there's a huge benefit that you get from doing this. You can now explore role-playing systems, such as today in this series we're going to be exploring original Dungeons and Dragons with Chainmail. That is the system that we're exploring today. But by choosing the Enduring Hexcrawl, what you are guaranteeing is that your character is going to, as long as you play long enough, they're going to reach higher levels. And usually when you play a game like original D&D, that it's very hard to make that happen. It can take a lot of time and effort to get a character to survive long enough to experience high-level gameplay. However, there's a ton of fun abilities that like magic users get at higher levels. There are magical items that you're not likely to find unless you can delve low enough to find them. There's all kinds of cool content out there for all of these old school role-playing games that are just so deadly and fun because of it, that you don't really get to experience all of their high-level content because of that deadliness. And so this is a cool way, to me, it's a cool way to basically force that you're going to get to experience high-level gameplay in that system at a major narrative cost, but this allows you to kind of compare role-playing systems and see what you like and what you don't like, and see how this role-playing system really plays out over the long term. So that is the overall goal for this campaign, to explore Chainmail and original Dungeons & Dragons through the format of an Enduring Hexcrawl with the Mythic Game Master Emulator. And there's a bunch of the Mythic ecosystem is so rich. There are Mythic magazines, there are Mythic variation books that you can pull from that are older than the second edition. There's all kinds of cool solo role-playing tips and tricks, mechanics that are involved with Mythic. So while I don't recommend that you go out and buy like every single Mythic magazine right off the bat before you start playing, if you're new to solo role playing, I think the core purchase is the Mythic Game Master Emulator, second edition. With just this resource, and I say just lightly, this is 230 pages of epic. With just this book, you can solo roleplay any role-playing game that you want. You don't need anything other than this. This is more than enough to meet your needs. However, in this campaign, I'm going to make use of advanced variations and options, and I'll let you know what I'm using. When I'm using them, I'll kind of talk through my system and what I'm doing at any given time, so that you're kind of in the loop, in the know about what's happening, and you know where you can find a similar resource. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the role-playing game today. So we have original D&D and Chainmail, and so original D&D is the first commercially available role-playing game. Actually naming the first of anything is a challenge, and so I'd like to be able to say that this was the first role-playing game. I don't know if there are any other games that can make that claim. It's possible that there are, but at the very least, Dungeons & Dragons, it's the most popular, it's a household name at this point, right? But this original Dungeons & Dragons game was the first commercially released role-playing game, and really prolific. It really kind of sets the stage for all future role-playing games. And I'm not saying that they invented all of these ideas. They actually intelligently combined mechanics from other games. But you could consider this one of the easiest places to name the starting point of role-playing as a hobby, as a genre of games to play. And so I've really been fascinated with original D&D for a long time, because it's so fun, but it's so poorly organized. And if you get the chance to read through original D&D, it comes with these 3 books. It was released in 1974. You've got Men in Magic, and this book is all about creating a character, and it includes all of the spells and magical abilities that your magic user and your clerics have access to. So this is all about your character. Book 2 is Monsters and Treasure, right? And so naturally this is a bestiary of all the creatures that were originally available in the game and the kinds of treasure that they could be guarding. It's exciting. And finally, the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, which is really like the earliest Dungeon Master's Guide. Gives guidance on building dungeons and kind of lays out how the game was originally intended to be played, which is more or less a massive party, sometimes 50 strong, right, in one campaign, with different dungeon masters interacting with different groups of players simultaneously playing in the same world. Really, truly incredible. But more or less having these parties of adventurers delve into dangerous dungeons, starting out as cannon fodder, as described before, with their low-level characters that inevitably die, and they roll a new character and die again, and roll a new character and die again, until finally some of them survive the onslaught either through sheer luck or through skill, and go on to become more and more powerful adventurers, shaping the game world more and more dramatically as they go. And there are rules here both for dungeon crawling and for hex crawling, which is the original kind of pair of modes that the authors anticipated the players playing in. And it plays very much like a war game, and that is because the authors were all wargamers, and essentially Dungeons and Dragons it's really, so it says on the cover, rules for fantastic medieval war games, campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures. This is really an extension to a war game, and that war game is Chainmail. And the series, right, is Let's Play Chainmail Solo, the Solo Chainmail Enduring Hexcrawl. This is a war game rule set, and it's honestly fascinating. It's really cool. I enjoy the turn sequence in particular, but this war game has 3 modes of combat. It really provides 3 combat systems. It has a mass combat system, which is like the main game, right? So you could just set up 2 armies. It has rules for making sure that your armies are kind of equal through a point system. You can set 2 armies up on all kinds of cool terrain, and you can have them duke it out. This has all the rules for these large units of medieval era military forces to go at it, to wage war with each other on the scale of an entire battlefield with hundreds or even thousands of individual combatants. Now, this also has a man-to-man combat system, which is, it's really exciting. It's kind of cinematic. I mean, there's crunch to it. It's not cinematic like you would imagine nowadays, but in comparison to the mass combat system, this is like an exciting mode for one-on-one encounters that you want to have more drama. And then there's the fantasy supplement, which is really cool, and you can see that this was like the precursor to D&D. And I actually don't know if this came first before D&D or after. I'm thinking that this must have happened earlier. But essentially the fantasy supplement allows you to, I think the original goal was to be able to refight battles such as the Battle of 5 Armies from The Hobbit. Like if you want to have a full-on wargame medieval clash between your normal kind of human forces and fantastic forces, maybe armies of orcs, maybe bands of goblins, maybe dragons, maybe wizards, right? Maybe superhero type characters like Conan. If you want to do anything like that, this fantasy supplement gives you the ability to do so. And this really does seem to be the precursor to Dungeons and Dragons. And in fact, original D&D does not provide a complete combat system. There's a lot that you need to infer, and one of the key things that you need to infer that original D&D does not provide is the turn sequence. And if we go into Chainmail, you'll see that we have this turn sequence here, and original D&D actually refers you to Chainmail, presumably so that you will use these rules for your turn sequence. So, which is pretty interesting. So in this series, we're going to be using, as our role-playing game, both original Dungeons & Dragons and Chainmail. Now, I didn't call this Let's Play Original D&D. I called this Let's Play Chainmail. Now, why did I do that? That is because there's actually a different combat system. It's not complete. You still need Chainmail, but there's something called the alternative combat system available in original D&D. And if I step to it, let's see, alternative combat system right here. Okay, check this out. This is a table where you have an enemy's armor class, right? and you roll a 20-sided die over a number to score a hit on your opponent. This is the combat system that would go on to feature in all future versions of Dungeons and Dragons. This D20 based roll to hit it became the combat system. Here it's known as the alternative combat system, so that you wouldn't have to use the combat tables provided by Chainmail. However, the alternative combat system does not. So here's an example of one of the Chainmail combat tables. The alternative combat system, however, does not give any kind of rules about the turn sequence, morale. There's all kinds of things that these two tables don't tell you how to play the game, is essentially what I'm getting at. So while we will always rely on Chainmail when playing original D&D, we do have a choice in which combat resolution mechanics, really which hit scoring mechanics that we're going to employ. And so we can either choose the alternative combat system. We would still use Chainmail's turn sequence, but we can play this way. And in future D&D supplements, they kind of assume that you're playing this way. Or we can actually make use of Chainmail's original combat system, and it's kind of confusing to do so. There's still a lot of vague things that you need to resolve when making that decision, but you can choose to use Chainmail's combat systems for your game. And so in this series, when I'm saying let's play Chainmail, this is what I mean. We're not using, in this series anyway, the alternative combat system. I do plan on having another series where we play with the alternative combat system, probably an Enduring Hexcrawl. I'm really thinking it would be fun to basically start an Enduring Hexcrawl for a number of systems and to see how they play out and what the differences are between them. I think that would be great. And so a few different ideas I have are, one, to have just original D&D with Chainmail with no supplements. The other is to have original D&D with Chainmail but using the alternative combat system, maybe without supplements, and then maybe to have a third that includes the supplements. So there are extra books. There's, in addition to Min and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, we also have actually, let me pull them up for you. Okay, so let's just briefly take a look at the different source books available for original D&D and Chainmail, some official, some unofficial, and I'll let you know what we're going to be using, what we're not going to be using. So far, we are indeed going to be using Chainmail, right? We're going to be using the Chainmail combat system. We're going to be playing with the original, what they call the 3 Little Brown Books. This is Book 1, Min and Magic, Book 2, Monsters and Treasure, Book 3, The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. And this is enough. This is enough to have unlimited, unbounded fun. You don't really need anything in addition to this. This is a complete game, although confusing, and you basically have to house rule it and make judgment calls on what certain phrases mean. It's a load of fun. It's so much fun. Okay, now those are the things that we are certainly going to use. Now I'm going to show you some of the other official supplements that we're not going to use in this campaign. So book 4 is Greyhawk. And this book adds variable weapon damage. It adds the Thief character class. There are actually only 3 classes to choose from when playing the original D&D without any supplements. There are more monsters to fight. Each of these books, you can kind of get a sense of what they add by looking at the index. It's a lot of new content for od&d. Book 5 is very similar. It's called Blackmore. I think this one adds like rules for diseases, so there's all kinds of new mechanics that get added. Maybe like the Paladin class comes in with Blackmore, which is like a special kind of fighter. Maybe the Monk comes in with this book. We're not going to be using this for this campaign, but we will use them in another campaign. Maybe we'll actually have one restricted campaign and then one kind of all-out campaign, and both of them being Enduring Hexcrawls could be fun. Next we have Eldritch Wizardry, right, which adds this really crazy combat system. I think it could be a lot of fun to try out. See the index here. Oh, this book also adds like psionic combat. So they were really thinking about like long-term campaigns that have kind of run the mill of what's possible with od&d. How do they expand on it? I think that's pretty cool. Then we have gods, demigods, and heroes, and this is basically a bestiary of gods, so that if you have really high-level characters, they can take on deities and maybe win, depending on their level, their abilities in combat. But I think this was meant to have really, really powerful opponents for very high-level characters in those larger campaigns. Then we have Swords and Spells. This is another official publication. It's not an od&d supplement, but it's a mass combat system to kind of replace Chainmail. So we could use this if we end up with any large army kind of situations. And that is the majority of... Those are all of the official publications, right, that I want to show you. This is Hauberk. This is unofficial. But basically, if you're trying to use the Chainmail combat system, so not when you're playing with the alternative combat system, if you want to use Chainmail's combat for a campaign, the Chainmail book only accounts for the wizard and the hero, which are comparable to the fighting man and the magic user classes in od&d. There's nothing about the cleric. So od&d provides cleric as a class, but Chainmail doesn't really account for the cleric. So this book, Hauberk, actually tries to apply. It's a later book that tries to retroactively apply information about the cleric class for you to use when playing Chainmail. And I think it really fits the spirit of Chainmail rather well. Also, interestingly, if you're not already aware, a lot of these old school games don't have the idea of an ability check. And a really common system used was to roll a d20 under your ability score, but that's never explicitly stated in od&d. So something that I like about Hauberk is that it adds this test skill task resolution system that feels very Chainmail. Chainmail is a d6 based system, and there are a lot of cases where you roll 2d6 to get an answer. And so Hauberk provides this cool test system that you basically roll 2d6 and compare it to a number. It's actually kind of challenging, which makes it fun. The default is having to roll an 8 on 2d6, so that's not... It's not 50-50, you most likely you're going to fail, and I think that's kind of interesting. So we will make use of Hauberk for tests, and if we end up needing to use clerical combat, then this supplement is going to add a lot for us. Okay, next we have Complete Chainmail and Forbidden Lore. These are unofficial supplements by this well-known person in the community, the Grey Elf. I believe that this name, Jason Vey, is the Grey Elf. I could be wrong about that, but I think this might be by the same person. Even if it's not, though, these two books, they don't really add a ton to Chainmail. They really explain to you how Chainmail works. This is more or less like philosophy or an interpretation, actually, if you will. This is one person trying to interpret how do you play original D&D and Chainmail together. How do you actually piece it together? These are two different books with thoughts on how to do that. So I'm not going to say that we're going to follow these books, but I do like to refer to them and use them for guidance as I play. And I don't know, it's so funny because if you just play if you play a retro clone that kind of has all of this laid out for you, like Swords and Wizardry, for instance. I love Swords and Wizardry. You don't have to guess what its You don't have to guess what to do in a situation because it lays it out for you. But when you play od&d with Chainmail, there are so many questions, there's so many different ways to interpret it, so it actually takes a lot to get a game going smoothly. And so these are resources that we're going to use to keep the game flowing smoothly. And if any kind of questions come up, this can definitely help. So yeah, this is a lot. Was there anything else? Any other supplements I wanted to show you? I think I showed you Scarlet Heroes already. Yeah, that's everything. So the key takeaway here is that we're playing Chainmail. We're playing with original D&D, the base game, and then we've got some supplements that might come into play. Hauberk maybe for skill checks, and these two books we might refer to if we have questions about how to play Chainmail and od&d, and Chainmail and original D&D together. All right, so we've got an introduction out of the way, and I'm now excited to create our main character, our Enduring Protagonist for Chainmail and original Dungeons & Dragons 1974 box set release. 3 little brown books. Let's go. Okay, so for character creation, let's see. There are 3 character classes to choose from. There are the Fighting Man, the Magic User, and the Cleric. And really, the main consideration when picking a class is your prime requisite ability score. So in Dungeons & Dragons, of course you have the abilities, right? Strength, intelligence, wisdom, constitution, dexterity, charisma. You receive an ability score in each of these 6 areas, and together they represent the innate abilities of your player character. And one of these is tied, actually 3 of these are tied to a specific class, and they're known as that class's prime requisite. So strength is the prime requisite for fighters, intelligence is the prime requisite for magic users, and wisdom is the prime requisite for clerics. And the key here is that depending on your prime requisite ability score, you're going to receive either a bonus or a penalty to experience earned in that class. So the key is that whatever class that you decide to choose, you're going to either progress more slowly or more rapidly in that class depending on the ability score of the prime requisite for that class. Hopefully that makes sense. But essentially, if we can roll a 15 or higher in our class's prime requisite, we'll get up to a 10% bonus to earned experience. But if you roll a 6 or less in your prime requisite's ability score, you actually can have up to a minus 20% from your earned experience, which is a pretty hefty penalty. Now, these ability scores are generated by rolling 3d6. So I've got our 3d6 ready to go. And I guess what I'm going to do is, if we roll for a character, because this is not, okay, sorry, let me take a step back. If we were playing with death and with a large party, a large cast of characters that were going to live and die over and over again, then the fun thing to do in that case is to literally roll the dice, keep them random, see what happens. Just no matter how bad it is, play with your character, because it's going to be funny. Even if you have poor rolls, right? It's fun sometimes, especially when you know you're not going to be stuck with that character for very long. It's fun to play around with a character with low ability scores. Now, in my case, I would like to, if I roll someone that's just going to be horrible, since this is an Enduring Protagonist, I might re-roll the lot. I won't change just one ability score. I'll actually re-roll the whole character. We might do this a few times until we get one that has at least okay ability scores. So, yeah, I guess let's just try it out and see what happens. What class do I actually want to play as? I think I either want to play as a fighting man or as a magic user. I don't know that I really care which one. Maybe the fighting man might be better early on because they're just a tad more survivable. Maybe I want the fighting man. So maybe I'll just roll. So the first ability score is strength. Maybe I'll roll until the strength roll is at least 13, so that we get that at a minimum 5%, or maybe we'll just roll until strength is 9. Yeah, we don't necessarily need the 5% bonus, so I'll roll my 3d6. If we get 9 or higher, I'll keep it, and I'll just keep going through the rest of the ability scores and see what happens. Okay. Yeah, we're aiming for a minimum of 9, which is an average strength. Yeah, okay. First roll, we get 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so strength is 10. I have a character sheet. I just printed off. I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm gonna try to do my note-taking analog, and to just describe to you the notes that I'm taking. You don't really have to see them all. I might post them like on Patreon or something, but it's really not necessary to enjoy the series. You can see here, this is the character record that I'm using, and I'm using it because, according to some forums, this is one of the earliest official D&D character records. I guess this one was not for sale, but was printed off and maybe given away for people. So yeah, I have this in front of me. So I'm going to be taking notes, and I'm going to indicate a strength of 10. Okay, so if our character wants to be a fighting man, they won't get a bonus to their experience gained, but they at least won't get a penalty, and that is excellent. Let's roll for intelligence next. We get 14. Ooh, now that's tempting. With an intelligence of 14, you would get the 5% bonus for playing as a magic user. Okay, 10 strength, 14 intelligence. Next, we've got wisdom. Together we get 8. That is 10. A 10 wisdom. Okay, so our character could be any of the 3 classes without taking a penalty to experience. Next, we're going to roll for dexterity, and you can see here that the dexterity roll is going to affect our ability to fire missiles. So really, it's our ability to use a crossbow or a bow and arrow. Yeah, roll high enough, we're going to get a +1 to all of our, not our damage dealt, but our chance to hit. Roll under 9, and we'll suffer a -1 to our ability to hit with ranged weapons. All right, rolling, and we get, whoa, that is what, 12? 12. So above 12 for the bonus. We're right at the top of the range, but it's not going to cut it. We're not going to have a modifier for our missile attacks. That's totally fine. Now this one's really important. Constitution. We want to roll above a 6. So hit dice are going to be incredibly difficult to come by. Incredibly important. It's going to be a while before we get more hit dice. Hit dice determines our hit points. Our characters are going to be very squishy and very likely a one-hit kill early on. Almost every level 1 character in original D&D is one hit from anything in the game when they start a campaign, which is part of why it's so brutal. The exception is if you play as a fighting man, you get a +1 to your 1 hit die. So if you roll a 6 as a fighting man, then you'll have 7 HP, and almost everything in the game, if it can only hit you 1 time, rolls a d6 for damage. So if you have 7 HP and the typical blow is a d6, you can survive 1 blow in retreat, maybe. If you're a fighting man that happened to roll a 6 on their 1 hit die. Otherwise, everyone in the game is unfortunately at the mercy of a 1-hit KO as they start. Brutal. I'm telling you, original D&D is absolutely brutal. But so this Constitution roll is important because of that. If we roll under 6, we get a -1 from each hit die. If you roll a 15 or more, you get this massive, massive, massive bonus of having a +1 to each of your hit dice, to each hit die, which would be insane. Okay, we're going to roll it and pray for a 15, but not a 6. We get, 9, 10, 11. Okay, no bonus and no penalty either, and that is just fine. All right, last but certainly not least, we're going to roll for our charisma, and we get 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, so we actually have a pretty run-of-the-mill average kind of character. So to recap, strength and wisdom are both 10. Those are our lowest. But they're in the average range. So our character is not like abnormally weak or abnormally unwise, right? They're in the middle. Next we have constitution and charisma are both 11. So, we're on the higher end of average in both of those, but still, we're average endurance, average constitution, average charisma. So we have just a normal chance of persuading or intimidating someone. And then our dexterity is actually 12. It's at the very top of average, so pretty dexterous, not anything exceptional. The one exceptional trait is intelligence, so that's 14. That's above average. If we wanted to play as a magic user, then we could get a plus 5% bonus to our XP, and then we could also cast spells, which would be interesting and useful. However, we're much more likely to die early on and to KO a lot, which is probably going to happen anyway. We can play with spells, so that is actually really tempting. So I need to choose my character class. With a magic user, we also can only use daggers. We can't really wear armor. So really the question is, do we want to be a tank, and do we want to go find a magic user someday, potentially? Or do we want to be a magic user and go find a tank someday, potentially? I think it could be fun. I think I'm going to go with the Fighting Man class. Okay, I'm writing down Fighting Man as my class, and while magic is going to be incredibly helpful if we can find any kind of magic user in our world, I think I actually want to be the tank. I want to be the person with all the hit points that can survive, and I think that will go well with the Enduring Protagonist. We're going to defy death, so our character is going to be, lucky. Like the Master Chief in the Halo series, his defining characteristic really was luck, and that is going to be our character. Scrappy. Okay. Excellent. So other things that we need to do for our character is we need to decide on an alignment for them. So in D&D, in original D&D, we have 3 alignments. They are lawful, neutral, and chaos. There's no lawful good, lawful neutral. There's no chaotic good, chaotic evil. It's just law, neutrality, or chaos. And you actually are able to speak a language of the language of law, the language of neutrality, the language of chaos, which is quite interesting. So I'm gonna mark, first off, there's a common language. There's a common language that most creatures will have access to. Most sentient races will have access to. And so I'm going to mark that we know common. And then for our alignment, I think I'm going to pick neutral. And that's not to say that my character isn't going to be good, but if we're not able to choose neutral good, if we just have to pick between law and neutral, I don't think my character is just going to blindly follow authority, which is what the law alignment almost implies to me. So yeah, we'll mark neutral, and so that means that our character is going to be able to speak the common language and then a neutral alignment language. And it's interesting to think about what that could really mean. Like, what does a language of chaos or neutrality or law really mean? Is it a way for them to kind of communicate across languages? Like I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how this mechanic will get applied in our particular world. We're going to choose neutral. Oh, we also have our character's race or heritage or ancestry is one way that we could put it. And there are choices. For the Fighting Man, we could be a human. We could be a dwarf. Dwarfs actually can only opt for the Fighting Man class. We could play as an elf, right? Elves can begin as either fighting men or magic users, and they all have their perks. There's also the halfling. So we have the races available in this game are the human, the dwarf, the elf, and the halfling, and they're all really cool. They're actually some pretty solid perks for every race, but I think I'm going to choose the quote quote boring choice of a human, specifically because in original D&D, humans are the only race that are unlimited in the number of levels that they can achieve. So for instance, the dwarf is limited to the 6th level fighting man. They can never climb above the 6th level, which is, in most cases, would be just fine because the odds of you actually achieving that high of a level are very slim. And there are huge perks that come with playing as a dwarf. High level of magic resistance, right? They can carry the +3 magic warhammer. They're the only species that can do that. They note slanting passages, traps, and shifting walls in the dungeon. And that is a huge benefit. Elves also have a higher chance of finding secret and hidden doors, which is really cool. They do extra damage to when fighting other fantasy races, which is, I mean, these are huge benefits, right? But they're limited, right? The elf can progress up to a 4th level fighting man or an 8th level magic user. And because we're playing as an enduring protagonist, my goal really is to have a character progress to a very high level. Like, I want play to continue beyond the normal kind of standard dungeon crawling play and to reach up into that kind of epic tier of that D&D can support, where your character is almost like a superhuman or heroic individual. But I want to watch them climb there. And so, yeah, I think with all of that in mind, the halfling's also cool. I think that they are basically, in Chainmail, it describes how the halfling can almost be like invisible, like they're super, super sneaky, which is useful on a battlefield and really would be useful as a solo player trying to avoid deadly situations. Yeah, we're gonna play as a human, so I'm gonna mark that on my character sheet as well. We're level 1. We're gonna start off with 0 XP. So we can talk about experience. In od&d, you gain experience by either defeating enemies in combat or by collecting loot or gold, right? Which is a very typical old school approach to gaining XP. And you get way more experience for escaping a dungeon with loot than you gain for killing anything. It's roughly, there's an equation here depending on your level versus the level of the creature that you're fighting, and potentially also taking into account the floor that you find them on, which is interesting. But basically it's 100 XP per hit die. So if you were to kill 10 one-hit die monsters, which for us is going to be incredibly challenging early on, right? Like we're essentially gonna have a 50-50 chance of living or dying in a one-on-one encounter. So making it through 10 kills to get 1,000 XP, that is going to be very challenging. However, we could find an item worth 1,000 gold and loot that from the dungeon, and boom, we just gained 1,000 XP. So while gaining XP for gold might seem strange at first, it actually is a reward that encourages role-playing non-combat solutions to your problems. You always do and can gain XP for surviving those life or death situations, but they are life or death. They're highly risky, and even playing with an enduring protagonist, we don't want our campaign world to spiral into a series of setbacks that are going to be impossible to return from. So this experience point system will reward us trying to be crafty or inventive in the dungeons, which is a lot of fun. And this is pretty standard across the more old school role-playing games. I would say the vast majority of the kind of OSR games that I have looked at, which is, if you're not familiar, old school Renaissance, right? So OSR. The vast majority of those games seem to award experience points for recovering gold. So that is going to be cool. We're starting at 0 XP. We're going to get no bonus or penalty to our XP gain. Now we need to come up with a name. And so to do this, I'm actually going to use Mythic. So we're going to use Mythic's meaning tables. So and I'll explain what I'm doing with Mythic as we go along. But Mythic has, originally from the first edition, the action meaning table and the description meaning table. And so the idea is that you roll a D100 twice on these tables to get some. So for the action table, right? If you want to know what random event just happened, you'd roll 2D100 to get a pair of words and use that combined with your current context to interpret what the random event was that occurred. With the description meaning table, it's the same thing. 2 tables that are D100, you roll for 2 words and it can describe something. You can use this to describe what does the common things that I'll do is I'll ask, what does the room that I just walked into look like? And then I'll get a description, and that can help to inform my expectations, right? So that I understand more about my surroundings. Another example is, for instance, combat. Maybe I want to describe how a combat situation is going. I might roll for a pair of description words to see, is this are their movements graceful? Are they stumbling around? Is this brutal? Are they keeping their distance? So there's all kinds of interesting uses for the description meaning table. For coming up with a name, I'm actually going to use the names table. These are all, look at all these bonus meaning tables that you get when playing Mythic. When you get this is the 2nd edition of Mythic Game Master Emulator, and it is rock solid. All of these meanings tables, you basically the same thing. You roll for a pair of words on them and interpret them to answer some question about your story. For instance, there is a trap. There's a trap table, and you can roll for a pair of words on the trap table to get an idea about what kind of a trap that you just encountered. I think that's really cool, and it's a powerful tool for when you're playing solo, especially. The names table is a little different. You roll for 1 sound at a time, and you keep going until you find a name that makes sense. So I will roll on the names meaning table. This is going to be a D100. In our first roll, we get a 22. So when interpreting these rolls, the red die is a D10 that represents the tens place, and the teal die is a die that represents the ones place. So you can interpret this as 22. And the first sound we get is A. Okay. And whatever name this comes up with, I might accept, I might reject, depending on how cool it sounds or not. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. So A is our first sound. Rolling again, we get 87. That is a Tor. Okay, so you kind of put them together like Ether, Ethor, Etor. I kind of like Tor, the sound. Torah. Ooh, interesting. It's like the Torah, like in the Bible. Okay. Do we want to have another sound? Yeah. So we've got A and we've got Tor. Let's go for another sound. 66. That is Orn. Ooh, Etorn or Torn? Just Torna? Torna. Okay, that's it. Torna, the fighting man. And I'm going to play as a male to match my gender identity for this character. Okay, Torna. I'm going to spell it Torna. So this is Torna, that is Torna, the fighting man. Okay, so we now have a character. Torna is a human fighting man, and so now we just need a campaign setting, right? So we just need to poof a campaign setting out of existence. And I already mentioned that we're going to Hexcrawl, which is the plan, that it's going to be randomly generated, which is true. That is what we're going to do. I do want to talk about the themes that I have in mind for the game that might inform my questions and kind of steer the direction of the narrative slightly. You never know what kind of random events or new threads Mythic is going to throw at you. So I actually have no idea where this is going to end up. My preconceived notions are first that I'm interested in exploring a dungeon crawl, right? So this is original Dungeons and Dragons. Most of the content is geared around delving and discovering new wondrous things, new terrifying creatures as you delve deeper and deeper beneath the surface. So first and foremost, I want a major piece of this campaign to be dungeon crawling. But another theme that I'm interested in is settlement building. And so I have this book, Home, A Light in the Darkness, a sandbox toolkit for tabletop role-playing games. And the key idea behind this book is that your home is this teeny tiny settlement at the beginning of the game. Really like a farming kind of community with no more than, let's say, 100 or so individuals. They don't have any kind of real stores. There's no blacksmith. There's no tavern. It's just a small agricultural community. And the book gives rules for how to expand and grow your town over time until eventually it can become a fully fledged city and all of the steps in between. So an example is maybe you clear away a field that has access to like iron as a resource, and maybe a group of dwarves move into your community to start collecting the iron, and they join your settlement, and your settlement grows. And then maybe in the center of your town, maybe a tavern opens now because of that. So this basically gives you role-playing hooks for improving a small settlement, and it gives you payoffs for if you're able to kind of accomplish those missions and give your community access to new resources. It basically structures how your town can grow. So we're not going to follow this book verbatim, but I might lift some of the mechanics for growing a city or a settlement into a city from this book, so that as we're playing Torna, one of his motivators, if we assume that he comes from this tiny town, his motivators can be helping out his community. And maybe he's not starting life as some battle-hardened veteran fighter, right? That's like a professional dungeon delver. Maybe he's starting off just as a farmer, and he's going to gain these skills as danger presents itself naturally to him and his community. So I think this is going to be an interesting theme to explore. And I truly enjoy stories that come like from humble beginnings. So thinking about our character not really being an adventurer off the bat, watching them grow into full-time adventuring, especially with the enduring protagonist trope, so that we know, we basically have a guarantee that they will eventually reach that point. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Now, this book, it does also have guidelines for hex crawling. It actually will help you set up your own starting hex area. Call it a hex flower. It's like your starting hex and all of the hexes that touches your hex. We're not going to follow that specifically. I don't want to build our setting up front and then go play in it. I would like to generate the setting as we go. So this is why we're going to use this book, right? We're going to benefit from it. We're going to use it as inspiration. We're not going to follow it verbatim. But those are kind of the themes that I'm aiming for: dungeon crawling, and then community building, settlement building. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. So we need a place to begin our story, and so we need a first scene. And this is an idea from Mythic, right? So Mythic, when you play Mythic, it's broken down into a series of scenes, and there are rules for how scenes progress. But a very important moment in any adventure is coming up with the first scene. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can randomly generate your first scene. There are actually several different ways to randomly generate your first scene. You can just come up with it. If you have an inspired idea, you can just decide that this is your first scene. And I think that's the approach that I want to take today. What I want to get out of this game is dungeon crawling, right? That's really what I want to do almost immediately. So I think actually for our first scene, we're going to say that Torna has reached the entrance of some kind of dungeon, and we don't know why he's here. We don't know what he wants from this dungeon. We can presume that it has something to do with his hometown, but of course we don't know that for certain. So I'm going to ask the Oracle, and when I say ask the Oracle, Mythic is our Oracle. Instead of asking a game master, we don't have a game master that prepared an adventure for us. Instead, we have the Oracle that's going to answer our questions as if it were a game master that had already prepared this grand campaign for us, and it'll work out in just about exactly the same way. You'll find it works very well. I'm going to use the fate chart here as my Oracle. This is again from Mythic Game Master Emulator 2nd edition, and so essentially what I'm going to do is ask the Oracle a question. I'm going to roll a d100 under a target number. If I roll under, it's a yes. If I roll over, it's a no. There's also the possibility for an exceptional yes and an exceptional no. And the two things I need to know to roll on this table are, one, the odds of something happening, right? So we have odds from impossible ranging all the way up to certain with 50-50 in the middle. And if you're unsure about the odds of something, the default is just to go with 50-50, which makes things interesting. So we need to know that, and then we also need to know the chaos factor. The chaos factor is a value that allows Mythic to control the pace of the story. So if we have a high chaos factor, then our story is going to be crazy. It's going to go out of control. If we ask our questions such that a yes is the more energetic or active choice, and no is the more passive or less active choice, then higher chaos factors are going to result in a crazier campaign. Lower chaos factors are going to result in a slower, more steadily paced campaign. And so the chaos factor is going to go up and down from scene to scene. And that is how Mythic controls the pace of an adventure. So you have some times that are kind of like downtime and there's not a lot going on. You have other times that are absolutely crazy. You can, reach up to some kind of peak or climax. It can get nuts. And Mythic does this by influencing the odds of a yes or no. And it ends up working out extremely well. It's a ton of fun. So this is just to give you a little bit of a backdrop on what we're doing when we're talking to the Oracle. This is the first scene. It's our starting scene. So we're going to initialize the scene with a chaos factor of 5. That is the starting point. Whenever you start a new adventure, the default is to start your chaos factor at 5. So we have a chaos factor of 5, and I want to ask the Oracle, does Torna know that this dungeon is here? So I want to know, was Torna aware that this dungeon was here, and did he travel to it specifically to reach it? Or rather, did he stumble upon it? Did he uncover it himself? Was he doing something else and happened upon it? So the way I'll ask it is I'll ask the Oracle if Torna intended if Torna knew that this dungeon existed and traveled here specifically for finding and maybe scouting out the dungeon. I think it's unlikely that he knew of its existence. I think it's more likely that he just happened upon it. So I'm going to say that the odds of him having set out for this dungeon specifically on his own accord, I'm going to say that those odds are unlikely. We're going to roll under 35, and we get a 54. No, so Torna did actually happen upon this dungeon. Quite interesting. I want to roll for maybe a description of where he was. Where was Torna? I think we might have a location table, like a location descriptor table. Let's check for that. I'm going to scroll down, and we get locations. This is a description for the location. It's not actually what the location is, and I think that's okay. So I'm going to roll for a pair of words. We're going to discover meaning on the locations table. Where was he? We'll see if it makes sense. 69, that is somewhere personal. Okay. And next we get 63, somewhere personal. and somewhere occupied. Okay, so to me, this means that Torna, his family, they're farmers in the small community of, maybe 100 to 120 individuals. They're here wherever they're at for some good reason. They know why they're there. His family, right, has this portion of the community that's their farmlands, right? And maybe it's pretty sizable. Maybe they're not able to spread across all of their land every single day. Maybe they settled here kind of recently, and they just haven't, square foot by square foot inspected the land around them. But whatever the case, somewhere in these fields that Torna's family have settled, however long ago, Torna is out in the fields when he stumbles upon a dungeon entrance. And to him, he might not know that this is a entrance to a dungeon. Maybe he just uncovers. Let's ask the oracle, is this like a cavern, or is it more like a true dungeon? Like, are there wooden doors that are moss covered? There are plants growing over the dungeon doors, and maybe he brushes aside the leaves, the vines, and wonders, what is this? It looks almost like a cellar, like wooden doors out in the middle of a field. And is that what we're experiencing right now? I'm going to say that it's 50-50. It could be a cave. That is a 54 no. So rather, Torna comes across a hole in the earth. Maybe it's literally down into the earth. I think maybe it's in the side of a hill. Is this set into the side of a hill for my imagination? Let's call it 50-50. Is it set in the side of a hill? 81, that's a no. So this is a hole slanting into the earth that he comes across in his family's fields that he's never noticed before, and he's possibly never noticed because of how recently it was settled or how large the area is. Whatever the case, he's here, and we want to know what it looks like. I have this resource. This is the Mythic Magazine compilation number 1. It includes the first 6 articles, the first 6 issues of Mythic Magazine, with several articles. And one of the things they have is a dungeon descriptors table. So I'm going to go to this cavern dungeon table and roll for 2 words to describe what this hole in the earth kind of looks like to Torna with 2 words. We get a 31. That is cave-ins. Okay. Cave-ins, and 45, thick with plant life. Okay, that makes sense. So there weren't vines covering a wooden door in the ground in the middle of the field, but there were all kinds of vines and overgrowth covering this hole in the earth. And Torna almost falls in, almost stumbles in, notices all of this overgrowth and kind of pushing it aside. Maybe he's hold on to some kind of farming tool. And I think it makes sense for Torna to have been holding some kind of tool, right, while he's wandering out and about. We could ask the fate chart, but I think we can just expect that he has something, right? And so he's pushing the vines away from the front of this just massive hole. Massive. And actually, I want to know how big this is. If it was the size of like a small animal, he wouldn't almost have fallen in. And almost if it was only the size of like one man, then maybe even that size wouldn't be large enough for him really to be shocked by, right? So I want to know, is this hole slanting down into the earth more than twice of his height? I'm going to say that it's not very likely, but it's likely given the context. That's going to be a roll under 65. We get a 30. That is a yes. So yes, this is a very large hole. We can see it's several times Torna's height across. Maybe he walks around the hole looking in and just notices there's plants all grown like moss, vines, all kinds of grass going down into the hole, into the earth, but it's covered over the top. So that implies nothing has been coming in and out of this hole, yet there it is. And now he's curious. What's down there? Does the hole look like it's been constructed? So he's looking into the hole. Is he seeing dirt all the way down? As far as he can see, is it dirt? I think that is very unlikely. Well, if it's an animal, then it could be dirt. But I think if it was like a purple worm, right? Like the big dungeon worms, that could have created this hole. But if we want this to be like a dungeon for dungeon crawling, then I'm going to say that it's very unlikely that he's seeing nothing but dirt as he looks down. That is a roll under 25, and we get a 90, so exceptional. No, he's definitely not seeing just dirt. So looking into the hole, he notices stone. There's stone walls. Are they instead of a, do I want to ask that? Square. I'm wondering, so the hole I'm imagining as being like a circle in the ground, right? And there's like a dirt path slanting down, but does it reach can he see in the hole that the dirt leading down reaches a stone flat surface that looks like the upper floor of a dungeon? I'm going to say this is, if it's not dirt, this is nearly certain. Roll under 85. Given our context, that is a 9. That is an exceptional yes. Okay, so how do we raise that? So he can see a grandiose entrance, like not just a stone floor, but maybe down into the hole, maybe several feet down, he can see the dirt suddenly is being supported by large wooden structures, wooden beams that are maybe holding this tunnel together. The entrance was maybe intentionally covered because he can see beyond the wood through the dirt, finally, this large, ornate, just grand and epic entrance to a dungeon like you would imagine out of The Legend of Zelda, with like the carvings of something in the stone demarking the entrance. What actually does he see on the entrance? Let's describe the opening, the entrance to this dungeon. I'm going to roll for 2 words on the description meaning table. We get 26. That is efficiently. 85. Efficiently rustic. Oh, so maybe these are the carvings of like old pagan looking deities, right? Maybe there's 2 of these, like maybe part humanoid, part animal statues on either side of an entrance. A stone entrance into an underground, maybe complex, some kind of structure. Torna can't see that. Torna is peering into this hole. I imagine that he's now either crouched down or even on his stomach looking down, shocked, just beside himself that there's this massive stone structure in the fields where his family lives. And the question now is, whether Torna is going to go back and report this immediately to his family, or if rather he's going to choose to delve immediately. And at this point, I think it would be safe to add Torna's family to our list of characters. So I'm maintaining a list called characters and a list called threads. And each of these lists, so the characters list, you add NPCs that you think are going to be important for your adventure to that list, and then Mythic can generate random events that invoke those characters, and it randomly selects which characters are affected or perform random events. So that's important. I'm going to add Torna's family to our list of characters. And then for threads, you add your character's goals to the thread list. So if there are missions or objectives that they are interested in pursuing, then you add them to that list, and I'll keep you up to date with what I add to each of those lists and what the results are when we roll on those tables. I'm going to keep those notes analog to help me move faster with making this content. Hopefully this is working out. So far, this has been really fun, and now that we're actually into gameplay, it's challenging to think and respond quickly to like word pairs, to make quick interpretations. It's challenging for me, but it's at the same time it's fun. Hopefully, I know that I'm rambling quite more and speaking quite more about each topic than I would have in our other videos, but I think what we're going to get out of this is longer sessions. I think we're going to get more scenes done more quickly. I think I'm going to be able to publish more content by recording in this manner. Hopefully this works for you. Please let me know down in the comments below what you're enjoying and maybe what you're not enjoying, and I can try to iterate, right, and make this as smooth as I can. Of course, there are all these giant trucks driving by me all the time, so I'm sure you can hear that. But I digress. I've added Torna's family to my list of characters. Currently we have no threads. I'm going to add one. I'm going to make this. Torna is interested. He's very curious about what's down below. So I'm going to add a thread, and this thread is going to say explore the, what do we call this? Explore the dungeon. We want to explore the dungeon. He wants to know what it is. He wants to discover its purpose. There's all kinds of questions that he has, spiraling through his head, through his thoughts. And so the first thread is to explore the dungeon. And I want to know, is he going to do this immediately without consulting his family first? I'm not sure. I'm going to I'm going to use another Mythic resource. This is the player emulator. Mythic as a player emulator from issue 41. So when I don't know what Torna would do in a given moment, instead of making that decision for him, sometimes I might do that to keep things flowing, to make the story go in the direction that I'm most interested in seeing. But sometimes I think I'm going to leave it up to Torna himself, treating Mythic as a player emulator in those cases. And the simplest way to go about doing this is to ask fate questions to Mythic involving a player character's decisions. So I've actually pulled up this separate group of fate charts. This is the mid chaos, the low chaos, and the no chaos fate charts. And I think what I found is that as the chaos factor rises and falls, it does a really great job at controlling how wild or crazy the story and the environment become. And I really love the chaos factor, everything it does for our gaming environment. However, when you start to use Mythic as a player emulator, chaos is still very useful, but it can be kind of jarring for your players' decision-making to so closely align with the environment. So for instance, if the chaos factor is 1, not only is nothing going to happen in the environment, but your players are going to be extremely passive as well. That lining up together makes sense, but it's strange when it's so drastic on the player's end. So I'm rather going to make use of this mid-chaos fate chart and a low-chaos fate chart for asking player emulation questions, and that is so that our players' decision-making is more cohesive, more consistent, but it still can be influenced by chaos and by the chaos factor. So I'm going to roll on the mid-chaos fate chart, and the question I wanted to ask is Torna going to go ahead and at least climb into the hole, at least just take a look inside the dungeon entrance before he goes back and talks to his family? It's right there. He can see it. Maybe he turns around, maybe he looks back, and maybe his family has some kind of farm or homestead that's pretty far away. And actually, let's ask Mythic that to be sure. This is their land. Is their actual home, the place that their family lives, is it pretty far away from where he's at, when all things considered? It's not like the hole's right next to the house. I'm going to say that this is nearly certain. That is a roll under 85 with a chaos factor of 5. We get a 34 yes. So it's quite a bit of a walk back to the house. Does he really? He's so excited. Does he really want to go back and tell them first, or does he want to look a little closer so he has more to tell them when he goes back? I think you can tell from how I'm describing this the way that I would like this to go. But we're still going to ask the question to give Torna the chance to answer, because he could be filled with wonder and excitement, or he could be filled with dread and fear in this moment. For him to be our enduring protagonist, hopefully it's not as much of the latter, but we'll ask. Does he choose to explore? I'm going to say that this is... I'll make it very likely. Roll under 75. We get a 10. That is an exceptional yes. Torna stands up, looks behind him, maybe brushes himself off a little bit. Whatever he's holding, be it a pitchfork or some kind of walking stick. We said a tool. It's probably a tool of some kind. We don't know exactly what it is. We can imagine... It depends on what they're doing on their field. He has some kind of tool. If it becomes important, we can ask about it. He's got his tool, his implement in one arm. He's going to use it, reach forward the stick into the hole to kind of brace for support. It's slanting down. It's pretty steep, so he doesn't want to crawl. He's crouched down. He's using the stick, and he's stepping down into the dirt tunnel, and his eyes are locked on these stone deities to either side of the entrance, and he's approaching it. He's getting closer to the entrance. Are these deities holding anything in their hands? I was trying to get a picture of what these statues might look like and what that might mean for us in the story. We'll make it a 50-50. I don't know if they're holding anything. That's a roll under 50. We get a 38 yes. What are they holding? Do they have their hands held up? I'm going to go to the description meaning table and roll for 2 words. They're holding something. 92. Softly. 86. Scary. Something softly scary. To me, this is... each is holding up a... Each of them is holding up a sconce. It looks like they're each holding a torch, but really, they're holding... Oh, wow. Really, each of them are reaching forward and holding a sconce with a real torch in it. And the torches... Scary. The adjective scary. The torches either look like they're lit or like they've been lit recently. They're not aged. They're not as old. Are they lit? Oh, we have to ask. Is he wide-eyed and staring because the flames in these torches, these stone idols are holding, are they lit? Wow. Because of the word scary, I'm actually going to make this roll Very likely. That is a roll under 75. And we get a 76. That is a no. So they're not holding torches that are lit. No, the torches are not lit. But there are torches in sconces that look like they could have been lit recently. Is there smoke? Is there the hint of the smell of burning in the air? I'm going to say that this is now unlikely because of the last result. And we get a 42. That is a no. So the scary aspect is just that they're each holding a torch that is not spent, but is not fresh. And he doesn't... It's almost like he expected this to be abandoned. He's never seen anything around this field to indicate that anything would be coming in and out of the dungeon and living here. But the sconces, the torches, they make him afraid. He's wondering, does someone live here? Did someone put these torches here not too long ago? Has he seen anything around his family's fields that would make him... Does he suddenly remember something that happened? I'm going to say that this is very unlikely. Well, this is a roll under 25. 25, yes. Oh my gosh. That is a yes. So suddenly he's thinking back to some incident that happened before. If we're going to now play out a flashback that Torna is having to some strange thing that happened that he's now being reminded of, seeing this dungeon entrance, I think that calls for a new scene. And I'm going to opt for a kind of a different scene structure than is recommended in Mythic GME 2nd edition. This comes from one of the Mythic magazines. Which one is it? This is Mythic Magazine, issue number 34. The article is the fluid scene structure. And essentially, rather than kind of calling a cut to the action in between scenes explicitly, once you reach a fate question that you think is going to lead into a new scene, either narratively because it's important or because the setting has changed, or something like that. If you have a fate question that seems like it's the start of a new scene, you turn that into a scene question, and it functions very similarly to the normal scene structure. You just, instead of, really the main difference is instead of calling action and cut, you just use a fate question to transition into the next scene. So how this works is, for instance, I'm going to ask the fate question, thinking back to Torna's prior experience. Is he remembering that he discovered tracks? Did he find some kind of strange tracks on his land recently that is suddenly coming to mind, and he's suddenly connecting the dots between the two? I'm going to roll a d10, and our answer is going to depend on how this roll relates to our chaos factor. We're transitioning from the first scene, so the chaos factor is the default middle of the road value of 5 right now. So I'll roll my d10, and we get a 9. That is above the chaos factor, so we get an expected scene, and because our scene was expected, which in this case is like the more energetic or active outcome, we're going to raise the chaos factor by 1. So yes, Torna is remembering that he found tracks of some kind on his family's property in the fields. Was it very near to the dungeon? Let's ask the oracle on the typical fate chart. When he found these tracks, was it very near to this location? We're going to call it 50-50 because it's not necessarily right next to the dungeon, but it could be. He could have found them near the dungeon. Somewhere, did he find these tracks somewhere in the vicinity of the dungeon? At a chaos factor of 6 now, this is a roll under 65. We get an 8. That is an exceptional yes. So the tracks were actually really close, maybe just, 20, 30 paces away from the hole. And he's now wondering, how did I not see this when I found those tracks? He's thinking, wow, I looked around. I looked all around those tracks trying to figure out what it was and who or what could have been here. And I didn't see this hole before. Maybe he's shocked. Okay, now I need to know, were the tracks bipedal? Was this some kind of two-legged track coming through his field that he could not place? I'm going to say, given the circumstance, that this is likely, but not very likely. That would make this a roll under 75, and we get a 53. Yes, oh my gosh. So there were bipedal tracks that didn't quite look human, and he couldn't really tell what they were, and they were very close to where he's finding this dungeon entrance now, with the pagan stone deities holding sconces. And so now he's beginning to consider, with a sense of, is it fear? Is it wonder? If those tracks, those bipedal tracks, came from this hidden underground structure, and now Torna he's reached the bottom of the dirt tunnel leading to the dungeon entrance, and he's locked eyes with one of these stone idols, pondering. And now I would actually like to begin generating the dungeon. I want to know what he sees in between the idols. And so I'm going to turn to the Strategic Review. This is a magazine that was published after original Dungeons & Dragons was released, and it covers several war games. One of the games that it covers is original Dungeons & Dragons, and each issue adds new creatures that you can use in your game, adds new mechanics, adds thoughts on rule clarifications or extensions to the game. The very first issue, and I should mention, the Strategic Review eventually became Dragon Magazine, which is, of course, a flagship Dungeons & Dragons publication. In the very first issue of the Strategic Review, we have this incredible article, Special First Issue Feature, Solo Dungeon Adventures. And it actually includes a ton of different tables that you can use to, as they describe it, with considerable dice rolling, generate an endless maze of solo dungeon adventure. And so we are going to use this resource to create the physical structure of our dungeon. And so I want to know now how large this room is. So we're going to roll for shape and size, and then exit, and then content. So we're going to roll a d12, and I need to prepare some graph paper. Okay, I've got my graph paper at the ready. So we're going to roll a d12 on the chambers and rooms table. Okay, let's see, here is my d12, and we get a 10. So this is a rectangular 30 by 50. Oh, is it a chamber or a room? I'm trying to think what's the distinction between a chamber. Maybe has like an open space near the top. I guess the entrance can be considered a chamber rather than just a room. Maybe there's some significance there. So we rolled a 10. That would make a rectangular 30 feet by 50 feet chamber. I'm going to draw this in the center of my map, and we want to know how many doors are leading away from this chamber. So the next thing, this is a table for unusual shapes. Next, exits, number, location, and direction of exits. So we're going to roll a d6, and room area, that is interesting. So we rolled 30 by 50, so that's a 1,500 square feet space. So here we have up to 1600 and over 1600. Up to 600 over 600. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to roll a d6 and compare. We get a 1. So that is, if it's over 600, there are square feet, which is definitely our case, there are 2 exits. So we've got a chamber. It is 30 by 50 feet. And it has 2 exits. I'm going to say that the exits are in the back left 2 corners. So Torna, he sees the idols to his left and his right, and through them, this large stone archway. And it's leading into a room, 20 by, said 20 by 30 feet. No, that's 30, 3 across. 30 by 50 feet, so it's deep. The room is deep, 30 feet wide, 50 feet deep. And we want to know what's inside. We could roll for the location of the doors. I'm just going to say that they're in the 2 back corners of the room. We want to roll for the room's contents to really get a picture of what's going on here, so we know what Torna actually sees. So I'm going to roll a d20. We get a 20, a treasure. Wow. Just a treasure. Okay, so if we look at our chamber or room contents, this is wild. If we roll a 1 to 12, it's empty. We can roll a monster only. We can roll a monster and a treasure, a trick or a trap, or a treasure. See table below. And usually if you have just a treasure in a room, I believe according to book 3, that is Underworld and the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, if you have treasure that is unguarded, it is supposed to be hidden, right? So let's see, the move turn in the Underworld. Unguarded treasure right here should be invisible, hidden behind a secret door or under the floor, locked in hard to open strong boxes with poison needles or deadly gas released when they are opened. There are many variants of the above possible and many other types of protection which can be devised. Quite interesting. So we have a room with treasure in it. Should we roll on the treasure table now, or should we maybe wait and see? Should we maybe wait and see what is in this room? What is this room like? Why don't we ask Mythic to describe the room for us? Yeah, this is pretty important. So we'll get a description. We'll roll 2 D100s on the description meaning table. For our first, we get 47. Hastily. Okay, this room is, hastily put together? 32. Hastily festive. Okay, so this room is, oh my gosh, this room has a large stone table set in the center of it, running away. So Torna can see this stone table, and it is running away from him. So he's looking across the length of the table down the room, and there are stone chairs on either side of the table. And my question now is the table, this would be creepy, is the table set for dining? Is the table currently set for dining? There's no one in here. We know that there's not a creature in this room. If we're following the strategic reviews guide here, then yeah, monster only, monster and treasure, or treasure. This is just a room with treasure in it. But we have this stone table, and I want to know from Mythic, is it set for dining? I think this is set for dining. It could have been set a long time ago. So actually, this isn't going to tell us whether it's currently being used or not, but it is going to make it ambiguous. Is it set for dining? I think that is maybe 50-50. The table could be used for other purposes. No, it's festive. So We actually have carvings similar to the idols that were in front of the in front of the entrance to flanking the entryway to either side. We have these carvings, these similar pagan carvings. So this is obviously a room for accepting visitors into this dungeon. Maybe, feasting there. It's like a room for entertaining, and so they've made it impressive. It's decorated. It's grand. It's something that Torna has never seen before. It's beyond his wild imagination, his wildest imaginations about what he would actually find in his field near his house. We determined that the dungeon's not right next to his house, but on his land. This is crazy. Is it set for dining? We're actually going to say this is very likely given the context of the room. It's actually nearly certain. And with a chaos factor of 6, that's a roll under 90. We get a 26. That is a yes. The table is set for dining. And now the harder question. Is the table set for dining, and does it look fresh? Does it look like someone ate here recently? I'm going to call this a 50-50. That's a roll under 65. And we get a 29. That is a yes. So Torna, dumbfounded, enters, peers. So he walks past the stone idols. He's standing in an archway, in a grand archway, looking around him at this ornately decorated room with this large stone table in the center with goblets and plates, and the drinks aren't empty. The chairs, they're not scooted in, and you would expect dust to have covered all over these things, but it looks, this is really what keys Torna off, that something is wrong here. He grips his pitchfork tightly with both hands as he realizes that the dust has been unsettled. And someone or something has been here recently, and his eyes shift around the room, unable to find any sign of life. He listens intently. Does he hear anything? Does he hear anything in the dungeon? Even just the dripping of water. Okay, actually, I'm going to say, does he hear anything active in the distance? Given what we know, I'm going to call this 50-50, roll under 65. It's a 77, no. So no, all he can hear is maybe the sound of air in a cave, the sound of air in a cavern, moving, humming gently, and the sound of water trickling, perhaps. Does he hear water dripping or trickling somewhere in the distance? I'm going to say this is very unlikely, given the nature of this entry room. I don't think there's just water leaking. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to say it's very unlikely. That's a roll under 35. We get a 29. Yes, so there's a dripping sound. The trickling of water in the distance, of air moving. And maybe the air and its movement, maybe being able to tell that the air is actually moving, maybe that scares Torna. And I think this moment is a perfect one to end the session on. Thank you so very much for watching the first session of the Solo Chainmail Enduring Hexcrawl. Reflecting on how the session has gone so far, once we actually got into the role-playing, I feel like it's been challenging to record these longer clips without editing and to interpret kind of on the fly, but it's also been incredibly fun, and I was just able to produce a much longer and maybe a more meaningful or impactful session than before when I was recording clips, smaller clips, back to back in a more edited fashion. So I don't know. I'm liking this so far. I'd really enjoy hearing your feedback. If you liked the longer session, in future sessions, the entire video, if we're not having to introduce a system in the setup, would have been all role playing. And this is much longer, right? Much longer of a format that I've been posting, and it also was much easier for me to produce. So it's like I was able to create more role-playing content in a shorter amount of time, and I still had fun doing it. I feel like I'm very quickly invested in this situation. So I personally, I think this is going well. I'm going to try this again in the next session, and we'll see how it goes. I'll keep iterating, keep improving, and trying to make these videos more and more entertaining as we go along. But I'm having an absolute blast so far, and I really hope that you are as well. In today's session, Torna, the fighting man from a small town, from a humble village, is out and about on his family's settled land when he discovers a hole in the earth that leads to the entrance of a dungeon, and he's terrified to discover, not only recalling that recently he's found bipedal tracks on his land that he could not explain, but now the sconces with the torches that may have been lit not too long ago, the table set for dining that may be actively in use, is terrified, filled with wonder at the possibilities. And I am so incredibly excited to see where this goes, where this heads in the next session. If you enjoyed the session, don't forget to hit that like button and to subscribe for more solo role-playing content. I'm the Lonely Dungeoneer, and this has been the first session of the Solo Chainmail Enduring Hexcrawl. Until we meet again, happy delving, and fight on!